I recently heard a story while listening to Corpse Husband on YouTube, and it was eerily similar to an experience I had when I was younger. So I thought I'd share. When I was around 13 years old, my cousin and I, who was 12 years old at the time, decided we were going to go camp in our yard. We have a shared property that has been passed down through the family for generations. There's about 150 yards or so between our houses, and it's just an open area of yard that hits our fields. The total land is about 2.5 square miles, so it's pretty big. We have fields, a creek, and even our own bit of forest. Now, we decided it was a nice summer night, and we're going to camp out. So I grabbed the tent we had in our parents' garage, and we spent the evening setting it up, and then going to his house for dinner. At around 9 p.m., we decided to go to sleep since it was getting pretty dark out, and there wasn't really much we could do outside while in the tent, except talking about our plans for the summer. Fast forward about 2 hours at 11 p.m., I got a call from my then girlfriend, and she was pretty upset about something that had happened earlier in the day. I was pretty tired, so it took me a while to actually understand what she was saying, while also trying to calm her down, but once I did, we continued to chat for a bit, until my cousin grabbed my shoulder really hard. I told him I was on the phone and he could wait, but he just pulled me around, and when I saw his face, I instantly told my girlfriend I had to go. He had his finger up to his mouth in a shushing motion, and he looked absolutely terrified. He told me to look towards the entrance of the tent in a whisper, before I could even ask him what was wrong. When I looked, I didn't see anything at all, so I just told him to go back to sleep. But after that, I heard the sound of someone walking around the tent. It seemed very unlikely that anyone would be out here, unless it was my dad, and he isn't the type of person to prank anyone. We are generally pretty safe on our property, as we are about 10 miles out of town, and everyone that lives near us are either family or old family friends. I told my cousin to be quiet and stay down, and I was going to see if I could find out who it was. But when I peeked out the front of the tent, once again, I saw nothing. I assumed whoever it was just ran off, or that maybe it was my dad after all. But instead of pranking us, he had just decided to come check on us. That was proven wrong, however, as I heard the footsteps walking around the tent again as soon as I lay down. It felt like hours I listened to those footsteps. Sometimes they would change pace and rhythm, but after a while, I heard them stop. I ended up looking at the entrance to the tent as I had the feeling of being watched, and I finally saw what had freaked my cousin out so much. Standing there, peering into the tent, was what appeared to be a thin man who was very dirty and almost completely naked except for some animal skins that he wore. His eyes seemed to glow like an animal's would if you shined a flashlight on them. Only, there was no source of light that could have made him shine that bright. I laid there frozen, as we peered into each other's eyes for what seemed like a lifetime, but was probably only around 5 minutes or so. At this point, he very calmly and slowly backed away, turned around, then ran off in the direction of the forest. I stayed awake, straining my ears for any sound indicating he was coming back, but after about an hour and a half, I had exhausted myself and fell asleep. When we woke up, we immediately went outside to look around the tent, to see if we were imagining things. But sure enough, there were bare footprints circling the tent. While looking at the prints, I noticed that some of the tracks were coyote paw prints, which would have accounted for the change in rhythm. We ended up finding a set of tracks that led into our field, towards our forest, and noted that about halfway from the tent to the field, the prints started changing from the bare footprints to the man on all fours, with footprints and handprints, then slowly becoming smaller, and turning into coyote paw prints. Ever since this experience, my cousin and I have both had multiple encounters with what we believe now is a skinwalker. I have never heard of one until a couple of months ago, when I first heard the Skinwalker story that inspired me to tell my story. The description of what they call a skinwalker is what prompted me to look it up, and why we now believe that what we encountered was a skinwalker. I have only dealt with them off our home grounds for the last few years though, as in 2016 I encountered something much bigger and badder than a skinwalker. Something that I think is keeping the skinwalkers at bay. My family has lived in Iowa since July of 2017, and we live in a small neighborhood with a minimum of 25 houses, and it is surrounded by a forest. I've seen many horror movies, and most of the movies are usually in a forest, so my paranoia was already alarmed. A year into living in Iowa, our dog was getting really old, so we got another dog so our old dog has a friend. We named our new dog Tucker, and he is a very energetic dog with everyone and everything. Our old dog died a couple of months later, and Tucker was one of the most interactive pets we've ever had. Fast forward a couple of years. My mom and dad got divorced, and she moved on to a guy that lives a couple of miles from our house. My mom and dad settled on a schedule on what day one of them can spend time with us, while the other goes somewhere else for a couple of days. For context, my mom's side is native, and we do believe in the lore of skinwalkers and wendigos. On my mom's days, she drives up this road where it's surrounded by a bunch of trees and a couple of houses and 2 farms. There's a hill on this road that she has to drive up, and as my mom drove up the hill, she saw something in a field near the neighborhood. What she saw was a tall, gray-skinned being that had deer hooves as feet, and it was walking into the woods. My mom was confused, and when she reached the stop sign, she looked back in her mirror, and nothing. Now my mom was scared, because she remembered all the stories of the Wendigo, and drove off like a bat out of hell to our house. When she told me this, I was already scared because of the stories I've heard on YouTube. As she told the story, I remembered the Skinwalker, mostly all the stories of the encounters I found on YouTube. After this, I was extremely cautious when I was outside on my bike rides. Without thinking, I rode my bike near the hill where my mom saw the possible Wendigo. I brought my camera to take pictures of the landscape because it was nice out, but my paranoia was going off when I was near the field, and I always trust my paranoia. As I rode off, I felt like I was being watched when I rode past the field. A couple of days later, it was nighttime, and my dog had to go outside to go to the bathroom. I put Tucker on a leash that is connected to the porch and let him out. I turned on the porch light so I could see what Tucker was doing outside, but I was cooking food as well, so I had to focus on that too. When my food was finished, I heard little energetic Tucker barking at something, so I walked towards the door so I could see what he was doing. He was barking at something in the dark. I then opened the door and told Tucker to stop barking and get inside. Not because I was scared, but because he was done his business and his barking could have woke up the neighbors. After telling him to get inside, he completely disobeyed me and kept barking at something in the darkness. At this point, my paranoia was kicking in, and I shouted for him to get inside, but he kept on barking. I started to get a little scared, and I finally looked into the darkness, and I saw nothing but eyes shining from the porch light. As I saw those eyes, an instinct kicked in to pull on the leash and scream out, "Get inside!" Finally, Tucker responds by reacting to the pull of the leash and running towards the door, and I slammed the door as soon as Tucker ran inside. I shut the porch light off, took the leash off his collar, locked every single door and window in the house, and covered every opening so no one could look through. After Tucker was off the leash, he ran downstairs into our basement, so I grabbed my food and went downstairs with him. It's been 2 months since then, and now I have a new routine when it gets dark. It's the same thing I did when I saw those eyes outside. I'll close the blinds, lock the doors, and turn off the outside lights. Now, when I'm outside, I need at least 2 other people with me, or a very reliable weapon. This happened about a week and a half ago. I live in Washington State, and I've always sort of been obsessed with cryptic stuff. Just a little background about me. I'm a 14-year-old male. I'm homeschooled, so I don't leave the house much, and I live with my mother and father. It was March 7th, 2022, at about 12 a.m. I was just listening to an old Jenna Marbles and Julian Solomita podcast from like 3 years ago and playing some video games. Red Dead Redemption 2 if you want to be exact. I was getting kind of tired and I had just finished eating a snack, so I went to go brush my teeth and wash my face. I did all my business in the bathroom and came back to my room. When I opened the door, my cat was up in his cat tower, which is right next to my window, and his back was arched. All the hair on his back was up, and he was hissing, which I've never heard him do. I look out the window, and standing there is my dad, which gave me a sigh of relief for a second, until I realized it wasn't my dad. It was taller than my dad. Its smile was weirdly big. My dad never just smiles at me, and he never came up to the window before. I said, "What the F is that?" And I ran out my room, crying and shaking, obviously, because I've never seen anything like that before. I went to my mom, who was sleeping on the couch, and shook her awake. I told her to go check if my dad was in the bedroom, and she asked why, and I told her I'd tell her after she checked, and indeed, he was sleeping in the bedroom. I told her what happened, and she sort of believed me, but sort of didn't. So she went to my room to check my window. Whatever it was gone. She checked all the other windows and doors, and nothing was there. She grabbed my cat, and we slept on the couch that night, all huddled together. Today was the first day I was able to go back in my room, and I still haven't told my dad about it. I have no idea what it was that I saw, but the only thing I could come up with was a skinwalker. I don't think I'll ever forget this, and I'm still terrified that I'm going to end up seeing it again. Hey, are you enjoying these narrations? If you are, please whisper into the like button's ear that they look good for being a blonde, before complimenting them on their outfit. Also, throw the subscribe button at Brownie Cookie from Domino's. It's his cheat day. Alright, back to the stories. Before I tell you what happened that night, let me tell you who I am and when this happened. My name is Tyler. I'm 16, and I'm a junior at a semi-private school. This event had happened 2 years ago, almost 3 now, so bear with me on the details. The memories from that night are still a little groggy. But anyway, here I go. It was late October in 2017. I had just gotten home after a long day of school, so I decided to hop on my PS4 and play some Call of Duty Black Ops 3 with some online friends. As hours passed, old and new friends had come and went. I was home alone for the week because my mother and father went on a business trip to Georgia, as well as visiting family. Just so you know, it wasn't the first time that I had to be home alone for a long period of time. Any other time, I usually go to bed around 9:30, but since it was a Friday and I was home alone, I decided to stay up a little longer. 9:30 came, then 10, then 11, then midnight, and so on and so forth. Eventually, my eyes felt heavy and were foggy because of how long I've been playing the game. Add on the fact that I wear contacts and my eyes were not going to hang in there for longer. So I decided to check the time since I knew that it was getting late. To my shock, I found out it was 1:20 in the morning, but I was in a match, so I didn't want to just get up and turn everything off. So I decided to finish up the current match, and then I was going to go to bed. As I was finishing up the match, a horribly bad and musty smell hit my nostrils. To be honest, it tissed me up for quite a bit, and I gagged at how bad it was. At that point, I knew I wasn't going to be able to go to sleep, so I played a couple of more matches in hopes that the smell would eventually go away, but that was not the case. Over time, minute by minute, it almost seemed as if the scent was getting stronger and closer. I attempted to ignore it and continue to play my game. This next part is what really scared me. First, let me tell you that I have noise-canceling headphones. However, I could have swore I heard footsteps from behind me. But then I remembered that Black Ops features 3D sounds. So I started to ignore it, thinking it was the game. Then I heard tapping. At that point, I took my headphones off to confirm that it was in the game. But to my horror, I heard it again. It was coming from the window behind me. It had shades over it, but the outside light was on, which illuminated a tall, lanky silhouette of something that was human-like. I stood in my room frozen in fear, looking at the silhouette, wondering if I was just delirious from the lack of sleep. But then its head ticked to the side like a bird, and it tapped on the window once again, in the same pattern. As adrenaline shot through my body, I decided to open the shades. When I got closer, the stench got stronger, and I could tell now that it was the smell of something decaying, or even dying. Could it be a dying animal that just so happened to stumble upon my window, I thought? But then I remembered the tapping and how in unison it was. I don't believe a dying animal could muster up the strength to do such a thing. I don't believe a dying animal could muster up the strength to do such a thing. Somehow, I finally got the courage to pull back the curtains, and I wish I hadn't. The thing I saw had a human face, but where the eyes were supposed to be, there were just sockets. It had sharp teeth, so jagged I could swear it could tear through steel. His face was decomposing and rotting. It looked like it had been dead for such a long time. I stood from where I had opened the window shades in fear. I couldn't take my eyes off this thing. I didn't know if it were looking at me or not, because of the empty, soulless eye sockets. Then it tilted its head with a sharp movement that startled me, and I screamed. It got up with such speed and went back into the woods. When it got up, I saw its body and how contorted it was and how awkward it moved. I couldn't sleep for the rest of the night, for weeks even. I haven't seen that thing since that day. For those of you who are wondering and potentially calling BS, I'm only sharing this now because in class a couple of weeks ago, we learned about Native American cryptids, and the Skinwalker fit the description so well. The only thing that didn't match to a T is that it usually takes the form of the things that it has killed. So my question is, who was the person that it killed to take their form? Looking back, I just hope that that is the only time I see that thing, because who knows what I might do if we cross paths again.